Okay, I think I found a mistake in Genesis.
That's a bold way to start a Bible discussion, but go ahead. What kind of mistake?
Well, either Genesis forgot to tell us a whole lot, or Cain was terrified of absolutely nobody. Because after Cain kills Abel, he says something that makes no sense. He tells God, "Whoever finds me will kill me." Whoever? Who is whoever? Adam? His mom? A very angry sheep? Or perhaps what we discussed from the Book of Jubilees was true, because as far as I can tell, there are only 3 people left on Earth. Unless...
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Okay, before we go down the rabbit hole, let's remember that this question has puzzled Bible readers for thousands of years. Because if Adam and Eve were truly the first humans, then Cain's fear doesn't seem to make any sense.
And it gets worse. God doesn't correct him. God doesn't say, "Cain, relax, there isn't anybody else." Instead, God puts a mark on Cain to protect him, almost as if God knows there are people out there who want him dead.
And if you're joining us for the first time, this is actually a continuation of our previous investigation into why Cain killed Abel. In that episode, we explored whether jealousy was really the whole story, what the Book of Jubilees adds to the account, and some surprising details that Genesis leaves unexplained.
But don't worry if you haven't seen it yet. These investigations are designed so you can jump in anywhere. Think of them as different pieces of the same giant Genesis puzzle.
Exactly. You can watch this episode first and still follow everything we're discussing. Then afterward, if you want the full picture, you can go back and watch our investigation into why Cain killed Abel. Because today's mystery begins immediately after that story ends.
Okay, we left off when a murder had been committed. Cain had been judged. He's about to leave, and somehow he's terrified that somebody out there is waiting for him.
The question is, who?
So today, once again, we're digging into the Bible, the Book of Jubilees, ancient Jewish traditions, and some theories so controversial that they've sparked debates for centuries. Because by the end of this video, you might never read Cain's story the same way again.
Uh-oh. Whenever you start a sentence like that, I know we're about to go down an even deeper rabbit hole than I thought.
Okay, Jose, let's get started. Genesis chapter 4. Right after Cain kills Abel, God confronts Cain, punishes him, and tells him he will become a wanderer on the earth. Pretty straightforward so far, but then Cain says that famous line.
Good place to start. After Cain murders Abel, God pronounces judgment. Cain is told that the ground will no longer yield its strength to him. He will become a fugitive, a wanderer. Then Cain responds, and this is the key verse. Genesis 4:14. Cain says, "Whoever finds me will kill me." And God answers, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7-fold." Then God places a mark on Cain.
And right there is where my brain starts hurting, because neither Cain nor God seem surprised that other people exist.
That's true. The text simply moves forward as if the reader already understands the situation.
Except, I don't. And apparently, millions of other people don't either.
You're definitely not alone. This question has been debated for centuries, maybe even millennia.
So what's the simplest answer?
The simplest answer is that Adam and Eve had many more children than Genesis specifically names. In fact, Genesis later tells us exactly that. It says Adam fathered sons and daughters, plural, many sons, many daughters.
But why doesn't Genesis mention them sooner?
Because Genesis often compresses enormous amounts of time into just a few verses, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries. The Bible isn't trying to provide a complete census.
So you're saying there could have been dozens of people alive already?
Possibly, depending on how much time has passed. Remember, the Bible doesn't tell us Cain killed Abel the day after Adam and Eve left Eden. Years may have passed, perhaps many years.
Okay, that actually makes sense. But it also creates another problem.
Let me guess. Cain's wife?
Exactly. But we're not opening that can of worms today.
Good, because that's an entire episode by itself.
I knew you'd say that. Okay, so Genesis gives us one possible explanation. But what about the Book of Jubilees? Because every time we open that book, things seem to get more detailed, and usually stranger.
The Book of Jubilees is fascinating because it tries to fill in many of the gaps left by Genesis. It gives dates, timelines, family relationships, and details that Genesis leaves out. According to Jubilees, Adam and Eve had numerous children over many years. Cain and Abel were not isolated children living alone with their parents. They were part of a growing family, a growing human population.
So according to Jubilees, there may already have been many relatives alive by the time Abel was killed.
Exactly, which means Cain's fear suddenly becomes much more understandable. Imagine murdering your own brother. Now imagine facing an entire extended family afterward. Brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, future generations. People who loved Abel. People who might want revenge.
Okay, now I'm starting to understand why Cain sounded terrified. Because if that's true, he wasn't afraid of strangers. He was afraid of family.
And sometimes family can be the people we fear disappointing or angering the most.
But Jose, there's still something bothering me. Because some people believe Cain wasn't afraid of family members at all. They believe he was afraid of something much bigger, something outside Adam and Eve's family entirely.
And that's where the mystery gets controversial. Because some readers believe Genesis may be hinting at people beyond Eden. People the Bible never fully explains.
Wait, are you talking about the theory that there were already humans outside the garden?
Exactly. And whether that's possible or completely impossible is where our investigation gets really interesting.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Now, before we continue, we need to make something very clear. What we're about to discuss is not something the Bible explicitly states. It's a theory that some readers have proposed because of questions raised by the text.
So we're not saying it's true. We're saying some people believe it might explain the mystery.
Exactly. And the theory goes something like this. If Cain was worried about people finding him, and if there weren't enough descendants of Adam and Eve alive yet, then perhaps other human beings already existed outside the Garden of Eden.
And that's where things start getting controversial. Because for many Christians and Jews, Adam and Eve are considered the first humans created by God. Period. End of discussion.
Correct. But some readers point to the fact that Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 describe creation differently. They wonder whether Genesis is describing different events from different perspectives. Others believe the two chapters are simply complementary accounts of the same creation.
And just to be fair, most traditional Jewish and Christian interpretations reject the idea of separate human populations.
That's right. The traditional view remains that Adam and Eve were the first humans, and that Cain feared other descendants of Adam and Eve. The people outside Eden theory exists, but it should be understood as speculation rather than something clearly taught in Genesis.
Honestly, the more we've looked at this story, the more the family explanation seems to make sense. Because if decades had passed, there could have already been many relatives alive.
And that's exactly why many scholars consider it the most likely explanation. But there is still one detail that fascinates me.
The mark?
The mark. Think about it. If Cain truly feared revenge, God doesn't remove the threat. He doesn't say nobody will come after you. Instead, he protects Cain from those who might seek vengeance.
Which almost sounds strange when you think about it. Cain just committed the first murder in human history, yet God protects him. Why?
That's one of the deepest questions in the story. Because the mark of Cain may not simply be about punishment, it may also be about mercy.
Mercy? For a murderer?
Remember, the story doesn't end with justice. It ends with both justice and mercy. Cain is punished. He loses his home. He becomes a wanderer. He carries the consequences of his actions. But God also prevents the cycle of violence from continuing.
So Abel's death doesn't become the beginning of endless revenge.
Exactly. It's almost as if God is saying, one murder is already too many. We're not going to solve violence with more violence.
Wow. I've heard the story my whole life, but I've never thought about it that way.
And perhaps that's why this ancient story still speaks to us today. Because beneath all the mysteries, the mark, the fear, the missing people, the unanswered questions, there's a very human lesson. Jealousy can destroy lives. Anger can destroy families. And sometimes, the consequences of our choices follow us much longer than we expect.
So after everything we've explored today, what's our answer? Who was Cain afraid of?
If we're being honest, we don't know with complete certainty. Genesis never directly tells us. The Book of Jubilees adds details but doesn't specifically identify the people Cain feared. The most common interpretation is that he feared members of his growing family and future generations descended from Adam and Eve. Other theories exist, but they remain theories.
So the mystery isn't completely solved.
That's why we're still talking about it thousands of years later.
And maybe that's why Genesis is so fascinating. The more answers you find, the more questions you discover.
Exactly. And speaking of questions, our next mystery might be even stranger. Because if God protected Cain, what exactly was the Mark of Cain? Was it a symbol, a warning, a physical mark, or something much more mysterious?
And that's the question we'll investigate next time. Until then, keep asking questions.
And keep digging deeper, because sometimes the most fascinating mysteries are hiding in plain sight.
See you in the next investigation.